Good afternoon, Intentionally Act Live family. I am Dr. Atyia Martin, the CEO and founder of All Aces Inc., and we are so excited today to be hosting the wonderful Bradley Dean. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Bradley and brag on his awesomeness, and then we'll jump into, as you all may be familiar with, for those who have watched us before, you'll be familiar with our starting with collective care and checking in with each other, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. So, I want to share with you all some very important things about our guests. So, I'm going to do the formal part and then I'm going to do the Atia edition. So, the formal part is that Bradley Dean is of FEMA's Risk Management Directorate. And so, for as part of that, we really are today going to be exploring the equity challenges of emergency management organizations such as FEMA, but also the larger field of emergency management, and how some of those equity challenges can shape the future of the ways we can approach resilience. And so, for folks who don't know, the wonderful Bradley Dean is a communications and partnership specialist with FEMA's Risk Management Directorate. And he leads the Resilient Nation Partnership Network, or RNP, and supports a diverse portfolio of interagency natural hazard mitigation and resilience initiatives. And at the core of Brad's work is the human element of resilience, which he truly sees as the most important part of generating greater social impact. So, what I also know about Bradley Dean is that he's an amazing human being, right? And we do a pretty good job on Intentionally Act Live of finding those amazing human beings to be a part of these conversations with us. And so Bradley, I met Bradley this hasn't been several, maybe a couple now. Is it a couple years back? Yeah, a couple years back now. And in our email exchanges, I got a sense of who he was, but then we had started having conversations. And I have been so impressed with his humility, with how he shows up, with his with the work that he does, but also how he interacts with people, how he respects all the different voices that need to be brought to tables in order to inform the work of emergency management, and his diligent commitment to doing those things in a way that is demonstrating, I think, modeling the ways we can leverage our power in order to influence the spaces that we're in, starting with how we show up. So Bradley Dean, welcome to Intentionally Act Live.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. I think that was by far and away the best introduction that I've got. I think your words, all of that coming from you means so much, especially since it's been a number of years since we've known each other now. And I feel like the first time I engaged you for a conversation, I was so nervous. I think I was like so impressed, like checking out your resume. It was like, if Dr. Martin's not the right person that we need to talk to, there isn't one. And so all of that coming from you means so much. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. And I don't want to blow by that. That does mean a lot to me. And so thank you, Bradley. I appreciate you. And so there's mutual love and admiration here and respect. And one of the places I would like to start in sticking with All Aces values is collective care. So we usually ask people, how are you doing today? For real. And so I'm going to model it. So how am I doing for real is I am not quite status quo today. So for me, status quo is extremely energized and extremely exhausted all at the same time. Like that's my status quo. Right? And so I think for today, I'm a little more tired than energized, but still feeling really good. I've had some great meetings and sessions today that were very diverse in their scope in terms of geography and topic. And so I'm feeling really grateful today that I get to be in all of those spaces, in spite of being tired and all that good stuff. I think that comes with it some days. So Dee, So, Bradley Dean, how are you doing today? For real, for real.
For real, for real. I'm doing great. I had a comparatively compared to to some other recent days. Today's been a little bit more relaxed and
Mm,
easy. There was a nice pacing to today, and now I'm getting amped up. Like I was excited for this conversation. So I think for most people that know me, I'm like this eternal optimist, and so I always have this energy. Um, I did work out on the Peloton a little bit this morning to calm myself down.
ooh.
My friends are like, you need to you need to get outside, you need to go for a run, you need to go do something. And so I got some anxious energy out. But yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, other than the heat and humidity, it's been a great day. And so I'm
Mm.
in a good place.
Thank you for that, Bradley. And I want to acknowledge the chat. The wonderful Dr. David Meshulam is here, who is the executive director of Speak for the Trees. And he is responding to your statement, Bradley, about having conversations with me. Um, and I don't think, I have a hard time believing that you still get nervous working with me, David. So, David, I don't know if I buy into you still getting nervous, but I'll rock with that for today because you expressed it as a reality for yourself. Um, I'm also want to acknowledge Fred Brown Jr. in the chat, who is saying that he's well in body and struggling in soul, optimistic in spirit. That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us, Fred. And we also have Carlos Santos Rivera, for real, quoting that as the addition to how are you doing today. Thank you for lifting that up. We appreciate you. And I really like how what Fred is modeling for us, for folks who are watching. How are you all doing for real, for real? Drop that in the chat on whatever platform that you're watching us on. Let us know how you're doing. And as we go through this, if you have comments, don't hesitate to put those in there. If you have questions, don't hesitate to put those in there too. In some of the marketing, we asked, come with your questions, come with your challenges so that we can talk through them. So thank you all for showing up already in the messaging, in the chats. We appreciate you. And so back to you, Bradley. Back to you. So in addition to the pattern of leveraging collective care and seeing how we're all doing, don't forget to put that in the chat, y'all. I'm watching. How are you all doing today, for real, for real? But we also have a tradition of asking people, what made you fall in love with what you do? So you got to tell us your origin story.
Yeah, I'll try to do this pretty quick. So I've always been kind of a big science nerd, and I've always loved doing a number of different things. Huge kudos to my parents in addition to sports. Like they used to send me to zoo camp and aquarium camp, and so kind of all things life sciences always drove a lot of like my life growing up and into high school. And I'm actually, a lot of people don't know that. Well, a lot of people do know it, but I'm actually a coastal ecologist. And I always wanted to do marine science. I worked at used to be the New Jersey State Aquarium, and I used to work at the Wetlands Institute in Stone Harbor. So all my background is actually like coastal ecology, and I
Mm.
loved it. And I ended up getting into NOAA and some remote sensing stuff. But everyone that knows me, and you've learned this about me, is like I'm just a people person. Like I love engaging with people and all over any discipline, all over the spectrum, anything that people do, I just love hearing about it and thinking about how it connects to my life and the work that I do. And so once this opportunity came up to kind of work in the resilience space and area, I was working in the private sector and kind of the time when I was with NOAA, like it just felt like such a good fit for me. Like
Mm.
people are so jealous of my job, and I love it because like you get to hang out and engage with people all day and talk about like linkages of our work and how to incorporate equity and how to reduce impacts from natural hazards. And so there's this relationship of sort of my individual personality. So anyone that's done the DISC assessment, and if that means anything to you, I am an I, and I am way out on the edge. It's like as far as you can get from the center. And although and so it was just a really good fit for both me, my interests, because I get to be that exposure to a lot of different people and a lot of different disciplines and work, but also like my personality of just enjoying engaging and being around and having conversation with people.
Thank you for sharing that. Welcome to the nerd family. We are proud nerds at all bases. So you are in a shared company. I'll let you be the determiner of whether or not it's good company. We'll work that out. And so as we navigate through this, I'm really curious because you led the process of coming out with an amazing document. So I want you to explain what that document was, how it was put together, um, and and as you think about some of the challenges that we've experienced in emergency management, resilience space around equity, what were some of the challenges that you wanted to really make sure were included in that report? So I asked that question a little bit differently from the way we talked about it before, but I did want to connect the dots to something tangible, um, and then we'll kind of go deeper from there.
Yeah. So first, thank you for being a contributor on that. But the origin of that resource, so the resource Dr. Martin's alluding to, is that it's called Building Alliances for Equitable Resilience, and it started out last October. We had a forum. Gosh, this is why we had to go through how many years was it? We had been trying to have a forum on equity and how it connects to resilience for what felt like, I think it was like a year and a half. We were planning, COVID happened. There was so much change in the world as it relates to the conversation around equity that it just took on a different perspective and a different life and I think impact to the community. But so we brought in all of these diverse perspectives, and I think and then following those conversations, right? So it was every Wednesday in October. We got together for a couple hours and we brought all these different perspectives together. We had 33 different speakers from 28 organizations. So I think that and I think that was one of the keys, is we wanted to bring a lot of different perspectives, right? We wanted to be inclusive of the many lenses that people see life through and the resilience through, and bring them all together. And following that, we wanted to figure out a way to co-create a resource with all of those amazing individuals that came together, that volunteered their time, that connected with each other and all of the participants. And that was difficult in itself. And I think one of the things is it's nice to look at the document itself as sort of this accomplishment, but there was so much change management that was associated with how we viewed content development from sort of our internal agency perspective. That was the big win, right? Like that document itself, I estimate, I haven't gone through it, and I don't think I'm ever going to run statistics on it. I said only about 15% of that document was original writing by FEMA as an agency. That an overwhelming majority of that document, not even close, was external contribution. And to take 26 external partners and individuals and to bring them in and to say, we want to hear your voice, and oh, by the way, FEMA and NOAA are going to back you on this, I think that process in itself is where the big win was. And I think that's the place, and I think one of the challenges that we had to overcome, and we still continue to try to overcome this, is how to provide these voices a platform to deliver that perspective, right? Because sometimes people feel like FEMA is always going to have the answers, or other organizations are going to have all the answers, and that's never going to be the case. And so how do we build that platform for people and for partners to come to the table and to be experts and someone that we can trust and we can go to and work through those trusted change agents and voices? And I think that we're super proud of the document itself. If you have an opportunity, please read it. It's fantastic. But I think you pointed it out. The process itself was the huge was where we saw so much value. And as we go forward, we're trying to replicate that on both a smaller scale as we have our thought leadership conversations, and then as we move into the opportunity to have future forums as well.
So I want to amplify what Bradley just said. I don't know if, well, I do know. Many of you have seen FEMA documents. They generally run at a minimum 100 pages and go usually hundreds of pages. On average, 300 plus pages. And so here you have a co-created document, which is amazing, right? In terms of the evolution. And to your point, you have the majority of that content being created by people that you have been in relationship with, who you've trusted to be experts. And I'm biased about the document because I was a contributor. You did out me. I am a contributor to the document. However, it's not about me, right? Like this process that happened, that summit or conference that was pulled together, and all of those amazing people who showed up and weren't just present, but really showed up and brought their A game, was amazing. And then to see a written document that FEMA led the process of bringing all of that amazing knowledge and talent together and expertise for the benefit of our nation was really special. It's special, and I want to really lift that up as a high note of the process and of what Bradley was just describing. So I also want to acknowledge our comments again, because we have some folks who have actually shared how they're doing. So we have Madeline or Madeline. I apologize. I don't know which one it is, but so I just said both. Says she was feeling distracted from her day-to-day work, but is staying present for this exciting conversation. Well, I hope that it stays exciting, and I hope that you are able to stay present for the rest of your day, especially the end of your day where you get some time to spend time with yourself, your family, your loved ones, or yourself, whatever that reality might be, but that you can decompress. We also have a message from LinkedIn user who I know who it is. I think it's Kevin Shanley, who is saying that he's finally emerging from the shadows of boxes. And our colleague Rico Manalo can relate to you because he just moved from Boston to California. And so Kevin moved from Chicago back to Boston. And we're so glad to have you back in Boston. I'm looking forward to reconnecting, Kevin. Lisa shared with us that she's happy to be here. And it's her third opportunity of the day to be learning, to be learning from me. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you. And I learn a lot from you too. So don't think it's a one-way street. We have Chelsea, who says that she's glad to be here as well, learning from us, you and me, Bradley. And that she's sad that she has to jump off early for another meeting. But we're so glad you were here, Chelsea, for the time you were able to be here. Samuel says he's excited to be present for this opportunity to expand his own understanding of the intersectional resilience or intersectionality of resilience and how we can improve equitable engagement. Thank you for that, Sam. We appreciate you. I did the Boston thing and I turned Samuel into Sam. My apologies, Samuel. We do that a lot in Boston. It's a bad habit. And then I just want to acknowledge that we did drop the chat for our LinkedIn users to be able to connect to the actual report. And that's bit.ly/FEMA BAER, all caps. Bit.ly links are case sensitive, so I just want to point that out. And Jones is sharing with us that this is his first virtual, he or she, or they, my apologies. This is their first virtual seminar since graduation. Congratulations on graduating, Jones. And last but not least, Sadie Martinez is watching from the ADA Symposium. We see you and appreciate you, Sadie. And for those who don't know, There's a lot of great events and work happening, particularly in the disabilities community. So thank you so much for being here with us, Sadie. So all of that said, from all of our amazing folks, they're here to learn. And so, and I think what you just laid out was about the report is this amazing process. And we also know that our field, emergency management, has some challenges, right? We still have a lot of challenges. We're kind of breaking the plane of equity and really talking about it in ways that don't feel so extracurricular, for lack of better terms, right? It's like a thing that we do when it's convenient um, on the side and we put the right words and stuff, but we're still not quite seeing it in practice when we think about all of the phases of emergency management, when we think about resilience, all of those pieces. We're still working it out. So for you and your experience in this work, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've observed? And they can be at the individual level and challenges you faced, challenges organizationally and structure and process and all of those things. So break
Yeah.
it down for us, Bradley.
So one I think that you'll connect with real quick is uh, just this understanding of what emergency management means and like what our role is. And I think kind of thinking about this call, like, yes, I work for FEMA, which means I technically consider, I am an emergency manager and I filled this emergency management role and, for COVID response and things like that. But my day to day, it's interesting for me to think about myself as an emergency manager because I'm so far on the front end. I'm very much pre-disaster, and then there's a flip of a switch when I get deployed to kind of support disaster response.
Mm.
It's this broad understanding of that emergency management is not just this response recovery side of things, and I think sometimes we feel like we get put in a small box, and emergency managers do so many different things, and that's actually just people that are titled as emergency managers. I think one of the things is you pointed out in building on Samuel's comment, this intersectionality of everything that we do, sort of these blurred lines that we continue to see. And that I think is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to emergency management and resilience. It's like everyone, whether you're an individual or an organization, has some role to play in reducing disaster suffering or impacts from hazards, and that is an individual level thing all the way up through large organizations. You think federal agencies like FEMA. And there's this idea of shared responsibility, but that brings us to I think what we're seeing is kind of this paradigm shift. I think we're seeing two paradigm shifts in emergency management. Is one, this acknowledgement that we think about it. I like to think about it in the financial sector. A lot of people think about return on investment. A lot of people think about like their stock portfolio, their 401k, but it's horrible. I think sometimes it's not great to think about return on investment when you're thinking about people's lives and things, but there is such a high return on investment for increasing efforts pre-disaster and moving towards a proactive nature versus a reactive nature. And I know this dives into an area that I hope we were talking about being nerds, that you nerd out on, because it's such a behavioral science component, right? That this idea of human nature, it's hard for us. Like we discount these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're seeing this shift to how do we build and integrate resilience into our process and even into recovery as you're recovering, building all of that in. This idea of build back better, right? But making sure that it's an enterprise component throughout the entire, for those of you that are emergency managers and think about it in the disaster life cycle. Every facet of the disaster life cycle has built-in improvements. And the other paradigm shift I think we're seeing is going from, and as it relates to this equity piece really specifically, is this equality-based design or delivery to equity-based prioritization. And I'm going to turn it over to you for this one, because I think you're going to be able to distinguish or communicate better the nuance between the two of those than I would. But I think that is that is the future, I think, of emergency management, of resilience, and many other things, environmental, social, and governance investing, all of those types of things. I think you're seeing the move from equality to equity.
Mm, thank you for that. And so I'm going to kind of answer the question directly about equity versus equality, right? Because we oftentimes get them confused. So when we talk about equality, right, we're giving everyone the same thing. It doesn't matter what you need, you all just get the same thing. If you need less, you get the same thing. If you need more, you get the same thing. And it creates, in many instances, this thought process of you. This is the structure. This is the process. This is how we've always done it, and so that's the way we continue to do it. And it doesn't take into consideration the unique realities of different communities, whether it's race and ethnicity, whether it's disabilities, whether it's families, whether it's poor people in our communities, whether it's a combination of those factors, immigrants, the whole range of people in our society that are underestimated. Um, and the combination of some of those categories that we don't even usually think about, the fact that there's that intersectionality that we were talking about earlier. Whereas equity is about addressing the barriers that are in people's way of accomplishing the mission or goal that we've set out to accomplish, right? Which requires a different kind of thinking, right? Equality requires the kind of thinking where it's like, okay, I just have to, count things and make sure that things get divided evenly. Whereas equity requires us to be in relationship with people. It requires us to understand the nuances and the complexities of people's realities. And it is about it has a process and it has outcomes, right? And we're measuring it. We're looking at disaggregating data by different social categories so that we can understand the scope of the inequities so that we can apply that equity to it. We're looking at what are the differences and barriers that different groups have been facing to being a part of decision-making processes, accessing resources, being a part of the full benefits of all that the work we do in emergency management has to offer, from the pre-disaster to the during disasters to post-disasters. And I want to say thank you to Fred Brown for posting lots of pieces, because we've been talking about emergency management and we understand that it's a very broad category. And in the private sector, oftentimes I refer to it as business continuity. And so our business continuity professionals are here with us today as well, learning. And one thing I'll point out from a business continuity perspective and what and kind of equity, connecting the dots, having an understanding of equity and as it relates to our employees and the people that we're serving, whether it's through a product or a service, helps us to actually thrive. And here's why. Number one, it allows us to understand the realities of our own employees and the barriers to them being able to help us as organizations accomplish our mission. So it's not just a nice thing to do. It's actually a business continuity imperative. If you don't know where your employees live, the realities that they're dealing with, the barriers that might be in their way to being able to show up for those essential products and services that are important to the core of our businesses, and this is the same thing in government and nonprofits, then we will likely not be able to respond and to support those essential product lines, those essential work, those essential services that our communities are depending on us to deliver. And so thank you for that, Fred, for holding us accountable. I also want to acknowledge that Kayla, I apologize if I didn't say your name right, Miss West, is saying that, I don't love talking about it in those terms either, Bradley, but I'm realizing that for some folks, that's the most accessible way for them to think about it. Got to hook them somehow. And the context on this is the reference to return on investment, right? And so for that return on investment in doing this work, there's multiple types of returns aside, not just the money, but it's also the ability to keep doing what we've been doing so that we can be sustainable over the long term, and much more than that. And so thank you for adding that to the conversation. An anonymous LinkedIn user says that equity necessitates an evaluation of both the process and the outcomes. Absolutely, right? We're talking about how we do what we do and how what we do actually leads to us accomplishing the goals that we set out to accomplishing, and making sure that we're looking at it in a disaggregated way so that we can understand the differences in how we accomplish that goal in different contexts, in different communities, in different realities. So thank you for adding that. And so here we have a question for you. And the question is, do you encounter resistance to equity prioritization, especially around race? Do you encounter resistance to equity prioritization, especially around race? And shout out to Dr. Luna, who is an amazing researcher, especially on the geographic information system side of the house and applying that to real world challenges. So thank you for being here with us, Dr. Luna. And I'll hand it over to you.
So, and I think this is actually a huge change in the emergency management field as well. And so I think race is the most visible. But you pointed out, Dr. Martin, we also have, access and functional needs and so forth. And I think there has been what we've seen is an increased prioritization of this, particularly over the last, year and a half. Like literally, I think since we've known each other, we've seen that just increase, like just through the roof. In current events, and a number of things have changed that and kind of spurned that. But I think the walls are coming down on that resistance. I think a lot of I don't think necessarily there was a resistance in our field, and I don't know if I can say that I've been in the emergency management field for as long. I did a lot of work in like the community engagement space, but I think there was always an appetite for eliminating some of those systemic barriers regarding race or access and functional needs, disabilities, and all of those things. But there were other barriers that were stopping people from getting there. I know that sounds a little bit cryptic, but like, I think I am not experiencing that, or I only want to speak from my perspective. I am not experiencing those barriers anymore. And I think there is a wave of support for working to actively change that. And I think one of the things, this leads me to something I wanted to build on this a little bit. I think it actively changes a little bit of the history. Like, let's talk about planning, because I know you have a piece of your heart for planning. So the phrase used to be, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, right? And that, I think that was the old way of thinking. Like I remember hearing that the first time, and I'm like, I totally get it. You need to be motivated. You want to be at the table. You want your voice to be heard. But you have to build on that a little bit, right? There's people that can't get to the table. There are systemic barriers and issues that are not allowing that to occur. And so I think the change in talking about race and talking about these other equities that we need to look at and build platforms for and incorporate into our process is like, well, how do you get them to the table? How do you eliminate those barriers? And like, there's things that are very tangible that you think about, like when you're holding community meetings, is it accessible via public transport? Does it have a ramp? Is it wheelchair accessible? There are things that, instantaneously come to mind, but there are other things. Like you're seeing a lot of, I've seen a lot of community meetings now that are offering free childcare so that people can get there multiple times, so that if you're a small business owner, you don't have to close down your store to get to the meeting. I think these are the types of things where, you have to consciously think about the needs of others. And we are starting to see that. And I want to acknowledge that comment from Marcos, because I can understand, and I have heard stories of people that have experienced that. And I think there are going to be times where, doing the right thing and having these conversations and trying to implement those types of solutions are going to receive pushback. It's happening now. We are starting to see it in some places. But I have to feel I'm an eternal optimist. The tides are changing. The tides are absolutely changing, and it's not going to be easy. And there's always going to be some sort of resistance. But I feel like those days are waning.
Thank you for that, Bradley. And I'll add context from being at the local level and having to interact with other cities and jurisdictions and the state emergency management infrastructure, and then bring up our next question from a viewer. So, I what's the best way to say this? The best way to say this is that for many years, I was the troublemaker in the room. I was usually the only person who looked like me across race, gender. I usually was the shortest person in the room. There were all types of things going on. And in the discomfort of trying to address these issues took me a while to navigate because the initial response is oftentimes defensiveness, denial, deflection, right? You know, this is why we did it that way. That's not true, or it's somebody else's fault. And so Ship being able to acknowledge that when it came to bringing up issues of race and racism in the context of emergency management over the years. So I think I've been in emergency management now for 16 years. I worked in emergency management and at the local level. And over the years, it's not until the most recent years, really, since I haven't been an active practitioner in formal roles. I still practice at the local level as a emergency manager at the community level, and helping to do things in my own community and city around community emergency response teams and things like that. But ultimately, I've seen an evolution in being able to have these conversations. The structure and process changes that we need, I'm optimistic that we will get there. Um, I'm cautiously optimistic because, and here's my caution, um, is for us to challenge ourselves in the emergency management to get out of our own way, to stay focused on the best practices. We know what those things are. There are amazing folks who are on here, who are watching, who are out in the universe, who are the shoulders of giants that we're all standing on, who have been beating this drum for decades, right? That we need to be paying attention. We need to be looking at social vulnerability. We need to be working that into how we think about risk, which translates into how we think about investments for mitigating emergencies, for responding, for recovery. And so all of that to say, I do think there is a discomfort because it sits in the larger context of the discomfort we have in society, but I think we're doing so much better. I'm not entering spaces anymore and people going, oh, Atyia's coming. She's going to bring that stuff up again. So always with love and always focused on supporting the community. But the reality is that I do see a slight shift. I also see a pattern of folks struggling with what it means to really do equity work, right? What does that really mean in practice? Which gets me to one of our questions we have from a viewer. What roles do you feel FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the International Association of Emergency Managers, or IAM, must play in leading the equity issues, and why have they suddenly have become much more aggressive after years of inaction? Thank you for that, Mr. Davis. I see you and appreciate you. Mr. Davis and I go way back to my Boston days when he was at Walgreens, and he's been to a number of different private sector institutions leading the emergency management charge and always centering equity. So thank you for being here with us, sir. And so Bradley, that question, I will toss that to you.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the second one first. So why why have they referring to, I think, FEMA and IAM certainly seem to be more aggressive after years of inaction. And I think we're seeing the greater awareness of the disproportionate impact. So I think there was the community of people that worked in that space, and that space meaning like the equity space, like you talked about your history of being the only person in the that looked like you, and I will say first, for me, I can have never experienced that. For one, like, so this is getting into like, what do we feel like? What is our role for equity? I think they're starting to see greater visibility of the disproportionate impacts. We'll focus on natural hazards and disasters. I think I'm not going to be able to speak on behalf of all of FEMA. I'm definitely not going to be able to speak on behalf of all of IAM. But I think one of the things that I've seen, and I think we are really placing a big focus on in the area of FEMA I work in with the Resilient Nation Partnership Network, and for the space I work in emergency management, is making sure that equity is not felt as like a novelty. That is, we saw, I think there was a time with sustainability where things were kind of getting greenwashed, and like equity was it was on trend, right? And I think there needs to be a level of accountability that's placed on on us at FEMA and on emergency managers, because if our job is to make sure that we're reducing disaster suffering, reducing impacts from natural hazard, like making sure that people are safe, that's everyone. And if people are experiencing disproportionate impacts, which we are seeing more visibly, I would say that like Hurricane Katrina, really, that was my experience of like where you're real, like these things are really being brought to light. I think that, combined with recent current events over the last year and a half, 2 years, and even COVID, I mean, we're seeing how COVID has exacerbated some of these inequities and impacts on like underserved and historically marginalized populations. And I think it has really brought those inequities and those impacts to the limelight. And I think what you're starting to see is this mainstreaming of inequity, this mainstreaming of disproportionate impacts, and this mainstreaming of like acknowledgement by a greater part of the population that are privileged enough not to experience those disproportionate impacts. And they are trying to now figure out what their role is. And I think one of the things that a lot of people are toiling with right now, and this is something that I personally have been feeling. I'm a 35-year-old white man from suburban America, and I can't say that my life has always been easy, but I can acknowledge the fact that I have not been exposed to the challenges of many others, particularly those in underserved and historically marginalized populations. And so, what is the right space for me? So it talks about what the role of FEMA is and what the role of IAM is. So I think that the work that I do and the work that our team does, and we are coordinators, we are facilitators, and what we try to do is I talked about this earlier, is building a platform for those perspectives to be for others, right? To share with others. Like as it relates to the work that we do, is making sure that you give those people a platform to share their experiences and to have their voices heard. And that doesn't mean just people that are available and that are there and that are willing to speak. That means going out and searching for those people. That means tailoring your engagement strategies to make sure that you're reaching them. I think one of the best stories, and I'm not biased because all the people that contributed to that resource were amazing, but like Nikki Cooley, you read Nikki Cooley's story, and she is one of these amazing people. For everyone on the that's watching, Nikki Cooley is Navajo. She is of the Diné Nation, and she works for the Institute of Tribal and Environmental Professionals. And she's in Arizona. She has we work with Nikki. Like Nikki tells us what her limitations are, and we go to meet her where she is. And then that's how we build our strategy of engaging her. And that aligns very well with some of these like more rural populations. And I think the role that we need to play, and this is, I think, all organizations, is
Mhm.
You need to meet people where you are, and that's probably an overused term. And I think sometimes I cringe when I hear it. But like, be a people person, right? People have needs, and those needs are different. And I think there's a greater acknowledgement of mental health, of public health, of disproportionate impacts, and that's why you're starting to see, I think, this aggression toward, to use the words that were in the question, this aggressiveness towards action, and this push for accountability. I think that's the final piece of this, is that there is there's a greater push for accountability.
Mhm. Thank you for that, because I think accountability is an important ingredient of equity work, right? So, so on the one hand, there's the conceptual things around fairness and equity versus equality and all these different pieces, and then there's how we implement it. And so what you use Katrina as an example, and you can go back decades and decades and decades and find all of these historical moments where we saw these disproportionate burdens and inequities pre-disaster show up post-disaster, thereby kind of accelerating the pain, suffering, and in many instances, death of people in our communities. Um, and so the opportunities that we have to shift those dynamics are plentiful. And thank you, Mr. Davis, for asking that question, and also making the statement that you and I have been talking about since we've known each other back in, over a decade ago now, working together across several disasters. But really, this idea that the people who suffer the most in day to day life are the people who suffer the most when there are disasters. And so we see that very specific connection. People have been studying it for decades. And we're at an inflection point in the field where we're catching up to decades of research, right? You can go back and find research papers and articles and video on this disproportionate suffering. So we went from Katrina, and then the PCRMA, post-Katrina emergency management. What was the R? What did the R stand for? Rehabilitation Reform Act, where we said, okay, we're messing this stuff up, right? And we need to adjust ourselves. And then now we're at a place where we've moved from just talking about it as a problem that exists to a problem that we can actually do something about. And I really appreciate the progression, and I hope that our fellow emergency management and business continuity professionals continue to push that mantle of action. What are the ways we're going to what are our metrics? Where are we today with supporting and partnering with communities? Because there's the challenges and needs people have, and there's the strengths that they bring, right? How do we partner with people on those things? How do we measure the gap between where we are, where we want to be, and what does that look like? What are our organizational responsibilities, our individual responsibilities to advocate for these things, to make sure that voices are at certain tables and that we're at other people's tables, right? Because people have their own tables that we need to go to. And supporting people and continuing to build their own tables so that we decenter ourselves from the work that needs to happen at the community level. So all of that sorry, I went down that rabbit hole, y'all, but for those who've known me for so long, you know that this has been kind of a passion of mine for a really long time, not just because I'm a Black woman, but because I've seen the pain and suffering of so many people across this country that were unnecessary. And it feels like, to Mr. Davis's point, that we can almost write an after action report before a disaster because underserved communities suffer disproportionately, and that we have to facilitate better outcomes. Then we move to the next disaster, some outcomes, and then we see the same after action report. And so we go from Katrina, fast forward to COVID-19, right? And here we are, and we fell into a lot of the same traps, right? Not customizing, not necessarily coordinating with folks on the ground, and being able to partner and So thank you for that, and thank you for allowing me to go down that rabbit hole. And what we'll do is I'll work with the All Aces team to post some of the resources from our Intentionally Act community for folks to take a look at that begin to help contextualize some of these lesser known moments in emergency management history that intersect with racial equity and social justice. So we can kind of do that deeper dive because there are so many stories and realities that can help us better understand the problem so that we can solve for them. So, that said, one of the things that you talked about, Bradley, is kind of being a convener, being a facilitator, kind of helping to adjust and adapt. As someone who is showing up and trying to influence the spaces that you're in, what have been some of the biggest challenges for you in being that person in all these different spaces?
Yeah, it's time.
Mm,
It's always it's one of those things, and and you know this, but like I try to do my best to almost drop everything I'm doing to respond to one of our partners or a request that comes in from an external stakeholder. Like it is it is something that I personally have prioritized because, like you said, there even if it's I will like a quick email or a call, like I'll get back to you. There is so much trust that is built in being present and being responsive, and it's trying to figure how to fight time, right? How to
mhm,
fight the shackles of time. And that is one, and then the other one is building enough trust with an organization that they refer you to someone else, right? Like we know it's all, everyone always says it, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And if I want, and if I or our network or our organization or your organization wants to reach the people you're not reaching, it's very seldomly going to happen. And particularly if we're talking about underserved and historically marginalized populations, it's definitely not just by going and walking into that community and finding the person. Like they're going to be like, who are you? You're not
mhm,
trusted there. And I think one of the things that has been a huge challenge, and it's something we again prioritize, is developing a level of trust with an individual or an organization, so much so that they are willing to recommend your work or what you're trying to accomplish or the things that you're trying to do to someone else and tell them that it's worth investing their time.
mhm,
And that is, when you think about it, like we think about it for contractors, like, hey, who did your counters, right? Who redid your roof? Like that looks really great. But we don't think about it, I think sometimes, like we think about it as professional networking, but like it means a lot more I think it means a lot in emergency management for someone to say, dedicate your time to listen or engage with this person. It may help save your life. It may improve your community. It may help the impact you're making as you're trying to engage new audiences. Like, and this is going to sound kind of like cocky, but like we don't need additional help engaging our what everyone likes to call our traditional emergency management agencies. Like they're at the table because those people are, it's their career, it's their profession, where we're seeing the greatest impacts. And I'm going to go back to our comment earlier, where we're seeing the greatest return on investment is engaging individuals or organizations that do not see emergency management or resilience as part of their mission.
mhm,
But we know that emergency management, that does natural disasters impact everyone. So why do people not see resilience, or why do people not see emergency management as part of the space that they work in or that they live in? And so building that level of trust and offering that time to people is just, that's the biggest challenge that we encounter. But it's also the most rewarding piece of the work that we do.
mhm. Thank you, because that actually ties well into wrapping up our time together. Can you believe that it's been almost an hour already?
Yes, I think we could go probably, if anyone wants to stay on, I'm pretty sure we could easily go till midnight. But I don't think everyone wants to do that, but I'm not surprised. But it definitely went faster than I thought it would.
Uh-huh. And there's a several themes that have shown up in this conversation that I want to lift up, and also pass on pass it back over to you for some final thoughts to close us out. So a couple of pieces. So this return on investment theme has showed up several times, and I think there are multiple ways that we can think about return on investment, right? So we've talked about a number of them here in terms of why we should even be doing equity work in the first place. Because in emergency management, our job is to protect people, lives, property, right, and the environment. Like that's what we do. And so what are the things that we need in order to do that well? Well, we need to make sure that everyone has access to receiving that part of the mission, which we have work to do on, and it seems like we're making this critical pivot that is creating some optimism, I think, for Bradley and myself, right? And that's one way to understand that return on investment, right? That doing this actually helps us doing equity work and embedding it into how we do emergency management across all the phases helps us to be able to actually accomplish the true spirit and letter of what it means to do emergency management. Then we have this piece on the impact it has in communities as a return on investment. And if we think about it as a delayed return on investment, that communities are not looking for handouts. They're not looking for extra. We've left them out of a lot of the benefits of all of the things that we can offer at emergency management, but not because we did it intentionally for the most part, right? But that ultimately, without intentionality, we don't see racial equity and social justice really happen, right? And so this intentionality that is required helps our communities to get their full return on investment in this society, in our cities, in our states, and in our communities across the country. And so thank you so much for being with us here today, Bradley. This is very exciting. And this theme of return on investment has come up so many times in the conversation that, it had me having all of those thoughts. And so what I want to do, because we started a few minutes late, is kind of land here with some practical, tangible things for our emergency management family. Right. So number one, when we think about return on investment, right, looking at the diversity and representation of the actual field of practice. How do we help folks to be able to be a part of the field who don't even know that it exists and don't see it as something that is welcoming to them? How do we make sure that we're looking at it across levels of our organizations in terms of leadership as well? And there are some amazing organizations out there that help do this kind of work, namely the Bill Anderson Fund, one of the amazing organizations that supports folks to be able to, from communities of color, to be able to get into the field. And we also have the opportunity to shift how we think about the incident command system and the national incident management system. So what are the ways that we can make sure that we have equity as part of our incident command system structure, right? How do we make sure that it's someone's job to be in relationship with the other folks in emergency management, in our incident command system, to help facilitate the issues that inevitably come up that our communities bring to us to say, hey, we need you to pay attention to this stuff because we're not getting what you all are saying is available for communities. And how can we partner with communities? And so this piece around having an equity officer within the incident command system with the support of leadership, where we're baking in equity into our just-in-time trainings, where we're holding ourselves and each other accountable for making sure that that's included in all of our conversations. And I am landing with the response and recovery piece, and making sure that we are not allowing our guilt and shame to get in the way of us focusing on problem solving and fault. And not focusing on fault, but focusing on problem solving. How do we own the responsibility? And so all of that to say thank you. Bradley, how do you want to close this up? What do you want people to know that is most important as they walk away from this conversation?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to shout out to Samuel because he kind of underhand pitched me the perfect closing. And so I don't know, it's kind of a long comment, but I don't know if you can throw it up there, but I'll read it. So it says, beyond purely the issue of time to build these connections and develop trusted referrals, are there any recommendations for how to best partner with these local communities to elevate their voices in a way that doesn't seem like white knighting? Often it can seem like external organizations and agencies may come in almost as a publicity stunt. And I think we've talked, this is something we kind of alluded to a little bit, but this like performative equity piece of the puzzle. And I think the answer to that is you kind of check your ego, right? The first is you don't know best about a community unless you reside there and you know every single person and every single person's needs. And I think the way to build those relationships is not to white knight yourself or the organization you are, but is to work through the community and figure out a way to make community members the white knights themselves, right? To build them up, to provide their needs, to make them the success, not yourself. And I think, I simplified it a little bit, and a shout out to Chauncey Willis, because I think, we had this conversation a while back where I was like, look, I just want to build a platform and get out of the way. And when I say get out of the way, that doesn't mean stop doing the work. It means that you don't necessarily need to be the face of that success, right? And so when you do those things, like that's how you build that trust with a community, right? I think that is where we have seen a lot of success, and where you build that trust is that it doesn't need to be our organization or your organization that was the solution. And that's probably not the right way to go about it, right? You want to elevate and improve the status of others in a way that they can co-create a solution with you, or to act and empower them to find those solutions. And so that it's a lot of work. I don't think people like building relationships. If anyone, like, you're not in school anymore, right? Like when you meet new people, like fostering relationships is hard and it takes investment. And I think people need to understand that is when you do that at the community level. And shout out, I saw Aubrey from Baltimore on here, and I know that there's some other organizations like Mayor Broom down in Baton Rouge that are like really excelling in these types of things, is investing. I think that is the one thing I'd like people to think about, is that, relationships are not things to be taken for granted. When I think about partnership, I tell people take the word partner out and insert friend. And if it still works, if it still makes sense, then you're doing your job. If you wouldn't do that to a partner or another individual, if you wouldn't do that to one of your friends, then it's not the right solution. And maybe that's how we need to think about it in emergency management, right? Like, would I want that result to happen to my friend or family? Absolutely not. And it still comes down to time. You have to be committed, and you have to hold yourself accountable. So that's what I want to finish up with. Samuel, thank you for pointing that out. It really helped what I wanted to kind of finish up with, and I'm glad I could connect to your question. So other than that, Dr. Martin, thank you for having me. I want to say thank you so much. I know that you're taking your time. It feels like I'm taking time out of my busy day to spend time with you, but I know how busy you are, and how awesome you are. So yes, there is not going to be a time, to Davi's comment earlier, there will not be a time where I don't get nervous to have a conversation with you, because you're a rock star. And I want to say thank you to all the people and individuals that joined listening in. It was really cool to see the people were listening in from the ADA conference. That was phenomenal. Thank you so much. And just thank you to all the people that invested their time and support in listening to us.
Thank you so much for that, Bradley. So, as everyone has heard, that quote in disasters or emergency management, when you need a relationship, it's too late to develop one, right? And Bradley just connected that statement to the realities of equity. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate you. You're getting so much love from people in the chat for bringing your insights and your experience and yourself to this conversation. And so I'm going to land here by saying I appreciate all of you. I'm sending so much love, hope, and intentional action to each and every one of you on your journey as you're trying to figure this out. There's no equation, there's no algorithm or easy button that's going to help us to be able to do this. It's the hard work that Bradley is describing that's going to help us get there. So thank you for helping us to have some additional language around that. And thank you for your leadership, Bradley. Have an amazing rest of the day, everyone.